13.4, Graphing Linear Equations in Slope-Intercept Form. When we talk about graphs of linear equations, there are a few things in addition to the slope that are important to note. The one big thing is the y-intercept, and that is where your line crosses the y-axis. The other one to note is the x-intercept, and that is where the line crosses the x-axis. Okay, so the x-intercept, again, where it crosses the x-axis, we know that this is where y is 0, right? And then where the line crosses the y-axis or the y-intercept, that is where x is 0. Okay, those are two important things that we must know when we talk about equations of linear relationships. Okay, so the big one that we're going to talk about right now is the slope-intercept form. And this is a special form of a linear equation. And it is in the form of, it's right up here, y equals mx plus b, where m, we know that's the slope, and now b we're going to introduce as being the y-intercept. That's saying that this line with this slope will cross the y-axis at this point b. Okay, so if our y-intercept was 1, we would know that our line then crosses the y-axis at y equals 1. Okay, and you can easily see that by if you put, we know that where the y-intercept is, that our x value is 0. So if you put a 0 in here, 0 times any slope is going to be 0. So then we know that this value here is going to be our y-intercept. Okay, so looking at these two equations here, let's find the slope and the y-intercept. This one's pretty straightforward. We know that it has to be in the form y equals mx plus b. The coefficient in front of the x variable is our slope. Therefore, our m in this one is a -4. Again, looking at this slope-intercept form, we know that this constant at the end is going to be our y-intercept. So our y-intercept is then -2. Okay, let's look at this other one though. This other one, it's not quite in the y equals mx plus b form, known as the slope-intercept form. So what we can do is we can add 5 to both sides. Then that makes the equation now y equals 3/2 x plus 5. And from there, we can tell that the coefficient in front of the x is our m. So our slope is 3/2, and our y-intercept is the constant by itself. So y-int is then 5. Okay, pretty straightforward. So now in your notes, if you can write the formula for the slope-intercept form and tell us what the letter B represents. And then you can do a simple problem of just noting the slope and the y-intercept of the equation given. All right, now to graph a linear equation in slope-intercept form, we could easily do what we did before, and that was to create a table, right? Where we had our x, we had our equation, we plug in our x value into the equation, find our y, and then we can write our ordered pair, right? So we could do that for several x values, right? -1, 0, and 2. And then we could plot it out and draw the line, right? So there's that way, which we can do 1 point. So let's choose where x is -1. So if x is -1, this becomes a 3 plus 3, so this becomes a 6, right? So our ordered pair is -1 comma 6. Okay, and we can continue that all the way down for various values of x. But the other easier way is to go, well, we know that the y-intercept is 3, so that the line has to cross the y-axis at 3 on the y, right? So 0 comma 3, remember, the y-intercept means that the x value is 0. We plug in 0 here, we get 3. So we know that this 0 comma 3 is the y-intercept. Okay, the other thing we can do is we know the slope m is -3. And what does that tell us? That tells us, remember, rise over run, or change in y over change in x. That means we're going to go down 3, 1, 2, 3, and over 1, right? -3, 1. Down 3 over 1. Down 3 over 1, right? Now, the other side note to make is you could say it was +3 and -1, and that would go up 3 over 1, right? Up 3 over 1, and so on. So we're creating this line, yikes, like this. Okay, now let's just double check. Let's see if we plugged in a value of x equals 1 over here, right, into our equation. So -3 times 1 is at -3. -3 plus 3 is 0. So our point then is 1 comma 0. And let's see if that point is here. It is 1 comma 0. So both ways work. This way is a little quicker, just looking at the equation and finding what the m is and knowing what your y-intercept is. Now, the second thing that they asked us is to identify the x-intercept. Now, the x-intercept is actually, remember, where our y value is 0. So x-int means y equals 0. So if we plugged y equals 0 into this equation, 0 equals -3x plus 3. Subtract 3 from both sides. Then divide both sides by -3. We'll find that our x is 1. So our x-intercept then is 1. X equals 1. Our point 1 comma 0. Okay, so here we have the y-intercept and now the x-intercept. But don't worry, we'll practice this a lot. And in fact, now you have 2 practice problems. Okay, in the first practice problem, we're given 2 different equations. And in both equations, I want you to identify the slope and the y-intercept. Okay, so for this first one, we're just going to look at it and remember that our slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, where the coefficient m in front of x is our slope. So for this one, what is our coefficient? And then our constant by itself is our y-intercept. Okay, don't forget to take the sign with it. Okay, so the other one then, this one is not quite in the y equals mx plus b form, so you first need to do that by adding 1 to both sides, and then we are given a formula or equation of y equals a -2/3 x plus 1. Now with this one again, we're going to look over here and remember that the coefficient in front of x is our slope and the constant by itself is our y-intercept. And the last problem. Here we are told to graph the linear equation and then to identify the x-intercept. So a couple hints on this one. First, you can either do the table, right? And you can plot it all out and draw the line, making sure that you choose several different points or x values so that you can come up with a good line. The second way you can do it, though, is you can just look at the equation, determine what your m is, meaning the slope, determine your y-intercept by looking at your constant, right? And then you can just graph it out, knowing that your slope is rise over run, right? So for this one, I can tell you right now, our slope is 1, because there's no number in front of x. There's actually an invisible 1. That means wherever we find the y-intercept to be, then we go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, and that's going to form our line. Okay, but the second thing we need to do is to identify that x-intercept. And remember, that's a point on the x-axis, meaning y has to equal 0. So if you go back to our original equation, put y as 0, and then solve for x, that will tell you where your x-intercept is. Those are zeros, not O's. And that is it for 13.4.